things to remember from last session. Remember, we talked about IQ-wise, and we discussed that it was easier said than done. That it's not easy to determine when it happens and who needs to be uncertain about the potential benefits of a treatment, so that the claim that it is a requirement for ethical clinical trials depends on what exactly we mean by that. And we talked about placebos and other research methodologies that present similar issues. None of those methodologies are necessarily unethical. In the case of placebo, this is the case even when treatment is available, and we are using a placebo. And that in order to determine whether it is or not unethical, we need to evaluate the scientific merit of the research, ensure that the risks to subjects are not serious, that we minimize risks to the people who are participating, and that we ensure that subjects provide actually a truly free and informed consent. So these are the things that we discussed last time. And today we're going to be talking about responsible conduct of research and issues of research misconduct. And you have three papers that addressed issues related to research misconduct. Part of the problem with defining research misconduct and therefore responsible conduct of research is that the definitions that we have for research misconduct tend to be very narrow. So, that'll be part of the discussion. But, in order to determine what research misconduct is, we need to know what responsible conduct is. So the Institute of Medicine, a few years ago wrote this report about the responsible conduct of research, and this is how they define it. The responsible conduct of research is not distinct from research. On the contrary, competence in research encompasses the responsible conduct of that research and the capacity for ethical decision-making. So this is not a very helpful definition of responsible conduct of research, but, it says to do research is to do it responsibly. And that's what people should do. Again, not very helpful to avoid research misconduct, but this is from the Office of Research Integrity. Responsible conduct of research is simply good citizenship applied to professional life. So a similar kind of definition. Researchers who report their work honestly, accurately, efficiently, and objectively are on the right road when it comes to responsible conduct. Anyone who is dishonest, knowingly reports inaccurate results, wastes funds, or allows personal bias to influence scientific findings is not. Again, not very helpful, because people who commit research misconduct often don't identify themselves as doing anything dishonest or wasteful or untruthful. So they define also research integrity as adhering to rules, regulations, guidelines, and commonly accepted professional codes or norms. As I said, not very helpful ways to define research misconduct, but the ways in which we do. So what are the ethical grounds for ensuring that it's responsible conduct of research? Why is it what is that grounds? What ethical values ground the need to conduct research responsibly? So one of them is honesty, as you saw in those definitions. So we want for researchers, obviously, to be honest. Why is that? I mean, other than the obvious reasons for, we want honest people, why honesty is so important when we conduct research?
I would say that because of the big impact that it has is that delay the field itself for several years, when even small dishonesties can.
Correct.
Because every single published article can lead to many others.
Right.
And build upon you.
Correct. So the impact of dishonesty in research doesn't affect only the individual who is committing the dishonesty or, the group in which that individual participates, but it affects all of us. So, is certainly a very important value when we conduct research. Trustworthiness is the other value also that underlies the need for a value that underlies responsible conduct of research. In which way is trustworthiness that value? Why does it ground or should ground?
Well, in collaborations, if you're collaborating with people.
Correct. So there is this important issue about epistemic trustworthiness and ethical trustworthiness. So we want to trust what scientists say and what our colleagues say, and the only way to do so is, again, if we believe the kinds of things that they are doing.
It's also like publicly funded, so like if you apply through like the NIH, it's public money. It's like everyone wants to be able to trust what happens.
Correct. So trustworthiness is essential for research, both that colleagues trust each other, particularly in a context where more and more research is done by different teams, because we need different kinds of expertise. So we need to trust our colleagues, but certainly the need of society and citizens to trust scientists, because if we don't trust scientists, what happens? I mean, other than the fact that we would not get funding?
You don't believe what they publish.
Right, and what's the problem with that? Right. Right, exactly. So in the context of research, we wouldn't be able to recruit people, but if we don't believe what people say, we're not going to be able to reap the benefits of the research. So, if people don't trust that indeed doing certain kinds of things or behaving in certain kinds of ways is bad for people or good, whatever it might be, people are certainly not going to do those things, and we are not going to be able to reap the benefits of research. Also is, a value is the duties that we have to others, that researchers have to society. Researchers have duties to ensure that the kind of research that they produce is of benefit to the population. So this is part of the reason why, this is grounds the responsible conduct of research. And fairness, as we will see, this is the case particularly, fairness in attribution, when we do research and who is going to be credited for what. So this is one of the issues, as you saw in one of the articles that we had for today. Okay, so given that, we don't have a very precise definition of what responsible conduct of research is, sometimes we also might have difficulties determining what exactly is research misconduct. But we do have definitions of research misconduct that are a little bit more precise. So research misconduct is defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. So fabrication, as you know, is making up data. Falsification, altering the research or the record and the data. And plagiarism, appropriation of another researcher's ideas without proper credit. So these are the three most serious concerns in research misconduct. But as you saw in one of the articles, these are not the only ways that people can commit research misconduct. Now, for these to count as misconduct, people have to do it intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. So if it is a mistake, if people don't realize that they are copying something from someone else, then it doesn't constitute misconduct, which is why it's so difficult to actually prove misconduct, because you have to prove intentionality. And so, proving intentionality is not an easy task.
And so
yes.
Regarding plagiarism, it's a really hard one to prove too, right?
It is, if you have to prove intentionality, indeed. It is not difficult in the sense that today we have programs that actually can show whether there has been plagiarism, and actually some of the increased rates of plagiarism might not be that people are copying more or plagiarizing more. It's simply that we have better ways to detect plagiarism.
But that's like for papers. But
Right.
But if you're thinking about results and ideas,
Right.
how do you prove someone is copying an idea?
Yeah, no, that would be difficult to do so. I mean, this is one of the problems with, again, insofar as you have to determine intentionality, it's difficult to prove that. But, plagiarism, again, in most cases, appears when people write papers and publish papers. And that is easier to detect today. There are a variety of issues with in what sense and why is plagiarism a problem? That is not always clearly delimited, what exactly is the problem with plagiarism, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So again, as I mentioned, it does not include honest error or differences of opinion, obviously. Now, it also includes those are the biggest concern, the main reasons for research misconduct. It also includes many other things. So, failing to get approval from appropriate committees. And as I'll show you in a minute, actually, this is one of the main reasons of increase in research misconduct today. Neglecting to point out that some data is missing. Neglecting to include data on side effects in clinical trial, which is common today. Also, failing to obtain informed consent from human subjects. Ignoring misconduct of others. So it is misconduct to not report misconduct when you're aware of it. And as you saw in one of the articles, many people actually do report that they have witnessed misconduct, though they are not reporting it. That also counts as misconduct. Authorship misattribution is a cause of misconduct or a reason for misconduct. Failing to disclose conflicts of interest, which again, though one might think that given the emphasis that we put in conflicts of interest, this wouldn't happen, but it actually happens quite often. Failing to publish completed research is also misconduct, also constitutes misconduct, in spite of the fact that happens, again, quite commonly. So, what happens? What do we think about misconduct? Scientific misconduct. I mean, other than it's bad. And we shouldn't do it, yes. But yes.
I would say that it plays a little with the economy of personal interest and institutional and just regular pressures that are within scientific community to develop and grow scientific knowledge.
Right.
So I think it's like that struggle of personal interest and wanting to do something that's remarkable and knowing that you need to keep doing your job. You
right.
need to be submitting this amount of papers in the next year or this amount of, or in this particular type of journal.
Right.
And the institutional pressure that is also building that up, and you need to bring grants and you need to be there.
Right.
In order to
right. So there are two theories about the research misconduct, why research misconduct happens. So one of these, what is called the bad apple. So that research misconduct happens very rarely, and that they are the results of just some bad apples. So there is some evidence that could support that approach to misconduct. What is that evidence? What could that evidence be?
FFP is relatively rare.
Correct. So, we don't have, at least there are no many cases that appear reported of research misconduct. Now, if people take that for granted, then it makes sense to say that research misconduct is just the result of, a few bad apples, but that is not affecting the research community in any significant way. Now, we should know better, yes.
Yeah, but these few bad apples, they could be localized to like specific areas of research that are more competitive than others. So, for example,
right.
in like the airline, I remember when gene therapy was like a big,
right.
There was a lot
yeah.
of competition.
Yeah.
People nudging the data or kind of trying to get ahead of their competitors right. to publish earlier. You probably have a lot more of a proportion of research misconduct there than if you were like in a different area where
right.
it wasn't as like high impact.
Significant.
Yeah.
Right. So that's quite like, that's true. I mean, even if one supports the theory that it's just about Apple, certainly the implication might be that some areas of research are more likely to have bad apples than other areas. But the argument that research misconduct is very rare is flawed. Why? So the first thing is that we are only focusing on the three big issues, plagiarism, falsification of research, so that's a problem. So if we only focus on that, perhaps it might be the case that indeed research misconduct is not that common. But even if we only focus on that, there are also some reasons to doubt that that is the case. What are some of those reasons?
It's hard to self-report that. So even if you try to survey, so you can not only see what you catch, right? There's not that amount of fishes in the sea. It's just like there's a lot more there. So you cannot rely on their self-reporting information of misconduct because people tend to report other people that they don't do.
Correct. So people are not inclined to, again, not only to report that they have done misconduct, but to report other colleagues that they have done, that something is fishy, because there are certain implications that follow from whistleblowing, for example. But do institutions have any interest in ensuring that research misconduct is publicized?
No,
Why not?
because it jeopardizes their reputation.
Correct. So it might well be the case that indeed research misconduct of the biggest kind doesn't happen very often. But the fact that we don't have enough cases of research misconduct is not evidence enough to argue that. Because it might be indeed that we are not looking for research misconduct, and therefore we are not finding it, clearly, we are not looking for it. That institutions don't have an interest in ensuring that research misconduct is brought to light, so that it might happen but we don't have evidence of it because it's not reported. Or that the institutions don't have actually mechanisms to find and report research misconduct, so that they would want to do it, if they found out, but they don't have in place the kinds of systems and mechanisms that would allow actually us to report research misconduct. So all of these things could explain why cases of research misconduct, even in the big issues, are not very high. And that would not mean that research misconduct is not happening, even in those big issues. Now, on top of that, turns out that research misconduct is more than just, the three big problems. All of these things actually account for, can count as research misconduct. What are the effects of actually thinking about all of these aspects as also research misconduct?
Sorry, can you ask again?
Yes. So if we think of research misconduct as including, these aspects of research, as being broader than just three big problems, what would be the effect of that?
A lot more people probably committed.
So we would have an increased number, exactly, of research misconduct cases. So whether we have few cases of a lot it's going to depend at least in part on how do we define research misconduct. So if we define research misconduct as only the three big problems, then the numbers are going to be lower than if we define it as including all of these things. Many studies that have dealt with research misconduct until very recently focus only on the three big problems and not on these issues, which might also explain why research misconduct appears to be so low, and why, again, this might support the bad apples theory. But newer studies that actually include these aspects show that actually research misconduct, which includes these aspects, is not that uncommon in the scientific community. What kinds of reasons, ethical reasons, might we have to say that it is better to include these aspects as part of research misconduct? What ethical reasons can we present?
Basically core ethical values that we discussed.
Right. So doing these things actually fails to meet some of the core ethical values of, doing research. What other implications does it have?
It's not fair to just penalize the others and not penalize you.
Okay, why not? We need to have an argument for what is about this that makes it also something that should be punished. What is it about this kind of behavior that might be as important as, plagiarizing or...
They have a responsibility to the society and community because they're getting funded
Right,
by
so
our money, so.
Could these problems actually result in bad science?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all we need. If these problems can result in bad science, in false results, even if it is not that they are actually actively, presenting those results as false, then, we have a reason to be concerned with this kind of behavior, even if it is not, again, fraud or the other issues that we just discussed. So this is, from the article that you had from this group that actually has done quite a lot of work on the issues of scientific misconduct. The first article that they published was in 2005. The one that you have is from 2009, which was a more recent article. But the first one was actually, the title was, it was published in Nature, and the title of the article was Scientists Behaving Badly. But in this one, in the one that you read, nearly 2% of scientists admitted to actually the biggest problems. They self-reported, okay? So what does that tell us about the data? If they are asking for self-report.
Probably under.
Correct.
Yeah.
That is probably underreported. People tend to not to be particularly eager to say that they have done wrong things. But even with that underreporting, quite likely underreporting, nearly 2% of scientists actually declare that they have fabricated, falsified, or, modified results. So, serious forms of misconduct. But nearly 34% admitted to some of the other questionable research practices that we just mentioned. And, something that is particularly interesting. So these surveys, again, we're asking both about one's behavior, do you do these things, and about colleagues' behaviors. Do you think that your colleagues do these things? And as you see, when they were asking about the behavior of colleagues, the admission rates were over 14% for the biggest, for falsification, as opposed to 2% that people self-report. So only 2% of people think they are committing, falsification, but they think that 14% of people are actually committing falsification. And, the same with the 33% of people who actually commit, as opposed to the 72% that people, think that others are committing. So how can we explain this difference in the data? I mean, one of the ways is obvious. We think that we are so much better than our colleagues. So, that's obviously the underlying assumption. But what other things can we infer from that evidence?
That this type of conduct, at least by the view of research, is intrinsic within the scientific community.
Right. And it's so intrinsic that we are not reporting it. We are not, paying much attention to it. Yeah, 72% of people, seem to be doing all these bad things, but, nobody is paying much attention to it, which clearly would be, quite problematic.
But if you do pay a lot of attention to it, and if you bring it up, you have to be very careful,
Right.
because you don't just want to do that. You see, that's another reason why people tend not to bring it up.
Right, not to
They're going to get
report.
in trouble.
Right. So this is the issue about whether we have practices, institutional practices that allow people to report misconduct in ways that would be not punishable. But so why do we want to be careful about facilitating too much reporting of misconduct? Why do we want to be careful about that?
People fake accusation,
Right.
false accusation.
Exactly.
People trying to put
Exactly.
together.
So there is this conflict between ensuring that people are able to report misconduct when it is truly happening, but ensuring that it's not being reported when actually it's not happening. And these two different values actually conflict. And what mechanisms are the best ones to try to catch as much misconduct as possible without falsely accusing people is difficult.
So
It's difficult.
if the idea of misconduct in terms of fabricating data and modifying it, wouldn't the fact that you can't reproduce it support that these people have done something
Right,
or,
that is wrong.
you know?
Yes,
So
we'll discuss the issue of the reversibility and whether in fact that is at least some indication that something is really, really wrong with the way we conduct science. I mean, again, there are many, many things that indicate that something is very wrong with the way we conduct science today. And certainly,
35, 50% of research is not.
yeah.
Are those like represented by papers that are retracted? Because I looked at.
I have some of that
No,
data
it's-
here.
Very few actual trials are attempted to be
Right.
replicated,
Yes,
but
Because it costs a lot.
it
Because
costs
you
a
cannot
lot,
follow
right.
the-
Yeah.
Those results, which is a problem. Again, the system in which we conduct scientific research, the kinds of incentives that we have, have the result of preventing us from actually determining whether what we know is actually true or not. So that's one of the many problems. So this is again these are some famous cases of research misconduct, that have been documented. Many of them actually quite new in all different areas of research. This was it's a recent study on research misconduct. These about the retracted scientific publications. So this is one of the studies that have been evaluating retractions, and retractions have increased, and there has been this question about what are the causes of retraction? Are they error, or honest error, which doesn't count as misconduct, or are really the result of misconduct? So they did this study, and as you see, over 67% of retractions were in fact attributable to misconduct, including fraud or suspected fraud for over 43%, duplicate publication over 14%, and plagiarism nearly 10%. So a significant amount, again, the majority of the retractions are actually the result of misconduct. And as you see, the percentage of scientific articles that have been retracted because of fraud had increased, over 10% since 75. Now, what kinds of things can we infer from these?
it could be the tenfold increase, maybe further policing or track record, or that it's just more.
Right.
It's hard to say.
Correct.
One of those.
Correct. So this information on its own doesn't tell us more research misconduct is happening. Okay, by itself doesn't tell us that. It might be that indeed more research misconduct is happening, but it also might be that we are better at actually detecting research misconduct. Now, we have some independent evidence suggesting that actually we are not very good at detecting research misconduct. So that's some evidence about whether we are just better at detecting it. But it's clear that, of course, journals are paying more attention to retraction, so that it is more likely now that, articles might be retracted than it was, 20 years ago, for a variety of reasons that have to do, obviously, with how publication records are now presented. So this is another interesting article, evaluating the lack of impact, actually, of retraction. So you would hope and expect that after articles have been retracted, they will not be cited, at least not as true, But, this article shows that because of self-cites in particular, the authors who are actually authors of the retracted articles keep citing their own articles. And because in some cases those are in high impact journals, the impact of the research, of that, even when they have been retracted, continued being significant. So this is a problem. And there might be legitimate reasons why the authors keep citing those articles, even if they have been retracted. What could be some of the legitimate reasons?
Methods
Right.
or
Image.
Right. So they might be citing the articles because they are referring to aspects of the article that are unproblematic, that are not related to the retraction. But of course, that's a difficult thing to determine. And the fact is that, again, 66% of the self-cites involve retractions due to errors and non-reproducibility. As we mentioned, that's one of the concerns. So, the fact that even when retractions happen, that is not affecting the scientific record, that's a problem. For the public, for the production of knowledge, of scientific truths, and for the effects on, obviously, society and patients. So, some of the, things about, again, the responsible conduct of research. This is, an article evaluating actually the disparities between the amount of resources that we put into research and what we get from those resources. And, the article actually argues that there is an increased disparity between how much money we put into our resources and how much we get from it. And there might be, as the authors recognize, there might be, quite a few reasons for that. But some of them actually are likely to have to do with the way in which we structure scientific practices today, which are quite problematic. But in any case, this is, the general public funds the vast majority of biomedical research, and is also the major intended beneficiary of biomedical breakthroughs. We show that increasing research investments resulting in an increasing knowledge base have not yielded comparative gains in certain health outcomes over the last 5 decades. Yes.
Well, I think that is an unfair statement.
Unfair in which way?
Because,
You mean what we could conclude, but that doesn't seem unfair if it is
well,
true.
it is, because the expectation from that statement, if I understood that statement correctly, is that if we have more knowledge base, there should be a comparative or equally gain in health outcomes. But the majority of the knowledge base we have, like for example, RNA polymerase, that will not translate to a health outcome, but we'll probably spend millions and millions of dollars
Right.
to purify and characterize RNA polymerase. Is RNA polymerase?
Right. But the study actually takes that into account.
Basic research versus
Right. Yes. No, they are taking that into account. So the thing is that what they did is they compared the results of the inputs and outcomes, I don't remember the years before, but, decades before, and the ones now, and they are simply saying there is an increased disparity. They don't say that the reasons for the again, they argue that there are a variety of reasons for the disparity, some of them more problematic than others. But it's just a simply, compare how much money we spend, 20 years ago, how much output we got, how much money we spend now, and how much output we get. And there can be many reasons, some of which might be, well, the kind of knowledge that we acquire now just doesn't result in health outcomes, but it might be very important nonetheless.
Correct.
Yes, which they recognize.
Yes, but for example,
But there is nothing there that says that that's not the case.
yeah, but
It just says there is a disparity. Now, what the reasons for that disparity is what is the issue.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how do they define outcomes, and how do they normalize between then and now?
yeah.
Well, you have the reference there. So I don't remember all the inputs and outputs that they had, but they were measuring, again, similar things in the past and in the present. So, outcomes could be either drugs, new treatments, those kinds of outcomes for health. And inputs, obviously, the amount of money or resources that we get, mostly public resources.
Well,
Investment in research. You what?
I agree with you.
Well, I mean, again, it's
subjective.
one might disagree. I don't know that there is any possibility of disagreeing insofar as the data is correct. The disagreement might be about the reasons that they give. People might disagree about whether this is a problem, but that's a different issue. This is just a statement about there is an increased disparity, and one might argue, well, yes, there is an increased disparity, and who cares? That could be. And again, they recognize that indeed one might respond as who cares, insofar as that increased disparity is not a result of anything problematic. But they argue that indeed is the result, at least we have some reasons to believe that it's a result of something problematic.
Well, actually, I'm a victim of this. Well, it is true. If you're in basic science, like I studied before DNA replication, they don't fund our studies.
Right,
And the reason they don't fund their studies is because the question like, how can this cure cancer?
well, that might be a problem
Yeah, but
of the
then-
kinds of,
but
and the
then-
ways we
but
measure.
When the person who discovered CRISPR, which was discovered in that
Right,
that person was not looking that they would revolutionize how DNA
right.
could be changed, and it's now number one treatment, and perhaps that person will do that.
Right, but again, scientific knowledge might be relevant for treatments, even if it is not now.
Correct, but
Right, so that's all we need.
I'm just telling you that when we get reviews back,
Right, that they say you don't cure anybody.
correct.
Yes, that's a
Yeah,
problem.
So, and this type of study
Right.
fuels that.
No, actually, they are critical of that way of thinking about science because knowledge might be relevant independently of whether it produces, cancer. The thing is, as I will show you in a minute, some of the arguments is that actually the majority of scientific information is false, period. It doesn't produce knowledge because it's false.
Well,
This is the issue about the reproducibility, whether, many of the research that we produce actually gives us information that is reliable. And, more and more evidence suggests that that's not the case, that, a significant amount of information that we produce in the sciences is actually not reliable. So it doesn't give us knowledge independently of whether it actually gives us treatments, which apparently doesn't give us either. So here's the, yes.
Just as a basic tenet with anything, if you pursue any sort of goal as gains are made in that goal, like
Right.
science you could, that's like one linear path.
Right.
Like it becomes asymptotic in terms of like the amount of additional
Right.
expenditure you need to
Right.
gain additional knowledge if there is a finite number of amount of knowledge in existence. So like if you get closer to a goal of knowledge, like you get less gain with
Right.
more and more.
Right, but then the issue is, okay, what do you do when that's the case? Is, well, maybe we can change the structures in which, the ways in which we try to get knowledge. So that might be one solution, rather than say, what we normally say now? When we get to that, and say, okay, we are producing, less knowledge for, let's get more money. Exactly.
Well,
So, but there are two ways of looking at the problem. One is let's get more money, and that's unsustainable, clearly, because we have many other things that are important, in human life. So, but one is let's get more money. The other is let's transform the way in which we conduct research in ways that, might make more sense. Now, is that an easy thing? Obviously not. Do we have an interest in doing that? Do scientific institutions have an interest in doing that?
yes.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, right? Not necessarily.
It's businesses, right? So more money is good.
Correct.
Well, the thing, the interesting thing is, like, for example, in some I know well, is that there's an effort of squeezing out basic science.
Okay, but that's a different problem.
And actually their justification was that they're more interested in translational science.
Right,
And
right,
that's the reason I jumped out of basic science.
right, right.
I went to translational science. Like,
Right.
if you're not doing translational science, then you're not participating
Right.
in this type of.
That's correct, but let's not forget that the overwhelming majority of money from the NIH goes to basic research. The overwhelming majority of the
Well,
NIH funding goes to basic research.
Well, there's one thing I know, and I mean, actually in one of our assignments, there's always a question of how you interpret, like, what is being done. So that's a topic for the debate, right? That majority of the budget of the NIH go to the scientists, basic science work, or the majority of the budget in NIH goes to translational work that looks like basic science. But there's one thing I know. An R01 is about capped at $250,000
Right.
every year. That's 12 months in 5 years. If you apply for a small business innovation grant, you can get up to $500,000 in 6 months
Okay,
and $2 million in 2 years.
okay.
And it's easier to win a small business innovation grant funded by NIH than an R01. I think many of you here.
Okay, but I'm not sure how that,
It's basically saying that the model of the NIH favors translational.
Correct.
right.
Because
Well,
it's
it's
easier
not
to
clear
get-
that that's the case. It's not
No.
clear that that's the case. But even if that's the case, again, even if that were to be the case, that still doesn't mean that institutions have any incentives to actually change the way science is funded or the way we produce science, which was the issue. Do we have an incentive to try to change the way that science is being produced and the way that, science is being funded?
So the incentive is the money. Because
Right.
if not, and
Yeah, so there is no
Correct. So no incentive, no
Yeah.
incentive,
Well, if you're not getting money, you get kicked out.
correct,
Memorial.
Correct.
I can tell it Memorial Sloan Kettering that they expect 80% of the salary of the PI
to come from grants, correct.
So,
And-
here's the problem, right? I just told you that a cap of R01 is $250,000, direct cost. A PI will probably cost about $120. That's almost 50%
Right, right,
of the grant,
right,
right? You're gonna hire a postdoc. If you hire a postdoc, that's cost about $60,000, including fringe benefits.
right,
That's almost $200,000.
right.
You have $50,000 left for research. That's nothing. You can't do research. I mean, you can ask people, how much will it cost to buy a kit? Right? If you're going to do animal studies, I do budget, so I can spew numbers here. If you do animal studies for about 50 animals, 60 animals, you
No,
spend
yeah.
about $20,000.
But so that's the again, that's the issue. There is not an incentive to try to change the system because, universities, for example, get money from what?
Well,
From indirect costs, indirect costs, from,
overhead.
right, overheads. So they are interested in having lots of researchers who get lots of grants because that obviously allows, the institutions to keep doing what they are doing. So there is not incentives to actually try and change the funding structure of how we conduct research. And that's obviously a problem,
And that's another problem for research misconduct,
right?
because the institutions need the researchers to keep bringing in
Correct.
the grants,
Correct.
regardless if they're
Correct.
true or false.
Or false, which is why that also, calls attention to the fact that institutions don't have lots of interest in trying to report or discover research misconduct because obviously that might affect them. And again, in this case, no one individual needs to be at fault for anything, okay? So this is why this is so difficult. If it was just individuals, the ones who are at fault, we could try to find who those individuals are, fire them, and, get new people who did the right thing. But the problem is that no one needs to be doing these things intentionally. It's just the way institutions work, which makes it much more difficult to actually change the systems. So this is an article by Ioannidis. Him and his group actually do fantastic work actually on the many problems that our scientific system has. If you don't know his work, again, he does fantastic stuff. Again, his work, one of his first articles in 2005, actually, the title of the article was something like why the majority of research results are false. It's a fantastic
There's
article.
a series, like why most is false,
Right.
why most is not useful.
Right, I have them not useful here, yeah. And again, most of the criticisms are actually criticisms about the way science is structured, the way in which we produce scientific knowledge and we produce, new treatments or whatever. It's really, really good work that they do, him and his group. They are at Stanford, so you had a question.
No, I just wanted to say it's only going to change when the institutions that grant funding
Right,
start demanding or start imposing different things
right,
because of the money rules.
right.
Different.
So when, like NIH
No.
started saying we don't want laboratories that are too large. So we are not going to fund laboratories that are too large. Oops, suddenly you see much reduced scale.
Right, but I mean, again, it's the kinds of incentives that we offer. How do we, who gets grants and, promotions and those kinds of things today in our current environment? What is that we value?
Publication.
Publications, yes, publications, that's what we value. So people have an incentive to publish as much as possible. Who cares about the fact that the results cannot be reproduced?
Yeah.
It's the number of publications and the journals where you publish them that is important. So that's one incentive that has perverse effects in how science is produced, because it gets people to publish a lot without paying much attention to what actually they are publishing, which is why, again, then the majority of results happens to be false, because there is not an incentive to actually ensure that we have studies that have the high, the number that, the power that they need, that are long enough to, in the case of clinical trials, all of those things that actually would incentivize truth or truth tracking, reports rather than just number of articles.
I think what NIH needs to do, which I think it will be politically impossible, is to enforce that every federally funded research should provide everything that they develop to other scientists.
Well, that's another, as we will
And it will
see.
be very easy and quick
Right.
to catch all the...
But again, this is the thing about how we incentivize research. We don't incentivize. Imagine that in promotion, when we try to promote people or hire people, we rank higher those people who are likely to share results with other colleagues, to be transparent about the data that they have, so that's what we value and what we...
Reproducible
Right,
results.
rather than the number of publications that you have. Well,
Until that
clearly,
changes.
that's going to change significantly, who we hire and what we incentivize. So, but our system works in a way that doesn't incentivize those things that are valuable, to produce science and knowledge. It incentivizes, ways
Numbers.
to increase money.
Is there a shift for like a pressure for people to start publishing like negative results?
That's what I was
Not
thinking.
much,
That's
no,
another-
not
There was-
much. not much. I mean, there is a new, really new in some sense, they are the Journal of Negative Results, precisely because,
Is there an actual? There is, right?
there is, the article, the Journal of Negative
It would
Results.
like prevent almost people doing the same research for a second time, right?
Correct.
It'll
so
save money.
useful.
No, it would
They-
save an incredible amount of
Save
money.
time, money, resources, and
But now, in which ways do we incentivize people publishing negative results?
I think that should count towards like your public, like you did the research. You
Right.
just didn't-
But it
didn't work.
doesn't, but it
Yeah.
doesn't,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. And so nobody wants to do it. I mean, it's like reproducing studies. Who wants to check whether studies can be reproduced or not?
What about a sponsor has to do that then?
Correct. So, but who, again, we don't have incentives for that. Right,
Yeah.
right. So that's changing the institutional practices.
Especially for like,
Socialism.
especially for negative results, I feel like it would be like the institution's benefit.
Well, there's actually a problem in publishing negative results. And the problem in I'm all for publishing negative results. I probably have a lot of papers if I do. But I think the problem...
You and everybody.
And everyone else. And I think the problem in publishing negative results is it's very difficult to evaluate whether someone's hypothesis is properly formed or not in basic science.
Right,
And therefore, then it will be the reviewer's opinion versus the author's opinion. Whereas if you have a positive result, there's no argument.
well, actually, there are lots of arguments anyway.
Well, you show like, if I say that if I implant a cell in the brain of a rat, and that regains the rat's ability to speak,
Right,
and I did that, and I show you a rat that speaks,
right.
what can you argue about that? There's no argument. The rat speaks.
Well, that would be quite something.
Like the research that we're doing, we destroy the brain, and we replace the brain with stem cells, neural stem cells.
Right,
And then you show that the rat starts from wobbling, and the neural stem cells propagate and differentiate with the proper cells, and the rat starts running again.
right,
It's like magic,
right.
right? But
Right, but if it turns out that then when you do it to humans, well, nobody's running magically, then we have a
Correct.
problem.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we have actually. That, a significant amount of the basic research that is
But
done
the
with
negative-
animals is not predictive at all of what's going to happen
Right,
with
but the
humans.
negative
It's
result will
correct.
not help
It's
that.
correct.
The what?
Publishing a negative result will not help.
Well, would not happen in that particular case, but they might happen in many other cases.
That's just my...
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, this is not just publish negative results for the sake of negative results. But the question is that we have a bias against negative results, and that, obviously, creates a problem for the scientific record. Yes.
I don't know if I don't really derail like that.
Okay.
I'm curious and put that. What if you incentivize people to be more thorough in terms of that, like really actually?
Right.
They try to do that with prospective clinical trials.
Right.
Like as we kind of were talking about before, like the big journals you can do a prospective clinical trial, but if you don't register, and even, so oftentimes it's not really true, but like there's a growing pressure to publish your protocol
Right.
before you even start enrolling. And there's this growing thing that like if you register it at clinicaltrials.gov, publish your protocol, no matter what your result is, it's going to get you a high impact
Right.
publication, even if it's negative, because you're proving to the world that your methodology was sound before you even enrolled your first patient. The problem with negative results is people don't know whether or not you just were a bad researcher.
Right.
So that's like the old bias against negative results, is they just think that their technique was bad. But
Right.
now the expectation is, at least for big trials, is to just make sure that the methodology is good up front, approve the methodology, and then go.
Yeah, I don't think that that's all there is.
There's not all of it.
Yeah, okay.
But
I just- 'cause
there's a-
you're-
for big
it's important
multi-center
to
trials,
point that out,
there-
There's something else to it, but I didn't.
Yeah, I will also,
About negative results, you mean?
Yeah.
I would also
Yeah.
argue that with clinical trials, you're trying less things, like you're risking less things. You already have proven concept somehow in order to get.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Right. No, but I mean, again,
For
it is
general medicine, things like that.
Right.
If you're trial's not registered, you don't have a chance.
And you're only talking about trials, which is, well, you know,
Yeah.
Right, about basic science, but it's the basic science that actually has the problem about the negative
Yes.
results.
correct. And
Right.
arguably, if that's foundation of business
Right.
magnification effective,
Correct.
starting out there,
Correct.
then that's the place to start.
Correct, and in fact, one of the arguments in the article that I showed you about the disparity, one of the arguments is that the reason for the disparity, or one reason for the disparity, is that basic science is just giving bad data. And therefore, when we get to translate things, we cannot translate it simply because the data was, bad. So that's part of the problem also.
That's what you're.
Well, I think there's some unfairness in that statement.
Again.
Because the basic, so I would like to parse translational science versus basic information. Basic research is what I did before. I'm going to purify a polymerase, and I'll show you what this polymerase will do, and I will show you mutations in cancer that cause problems. So, and I will repeat that several times, multiple times. I'll do that. But those kind of data are not the ones, in my experience, being translated for clinical trial. What's being translated for clinical trial are the proof of concept type of experiments,
Right.
which are actually not basic science. They're translational science, right? So they're the one has a problem, and they have conflict of interest because they're looking forward for a clinical trial.
Who is
So,
looking for one? The
The
science?
people who are doing translational science.
No, they might
The
be,
basic science-
the basic, I mean, again.
The basic scientists, I can tell you, we talk to the people in more my boss and the other ones, and even my boss actually, he does not believe in patent, even though he discovered a slew of
Right, that's another
But
problem,
it's a
yes.
different problem.
Right.
But the point being is that the basic science, the data that the people in basic science accumulate are not the one that is being used to base a clinical trial. It's
So-
translational research.
Okay,
So
so,
blame translational research, not basic research.
okay, so here we are blaming everybody, so we are equally blamers.
It's actually interesting. It's one of the papers that you made us read. It's the conflict of interest.
Right, conflicts of interest who many people can have at different stages in the process of scientific knowledge.
Correct. But
So, because basic scientists can have interest in patenting their methodology, for example. And that's one of the biggest problems actually with what is called the patent trolls. It's precisely basic scientists patenting methods that then other people cannot use in order to be able to do the research that they need to do. But this is not a question of blaming any individual, again.
No, I'm talking
Did you
about,
watch
like,
Silicon Valley
identifying-
last night?
No.
Okay,
No, I'm
patent
actually-
trolls.
I'm actually going, I'm not blaming individuals per se, but identifying where the problem is coming
And the
from.
problem seems to be all over the
Yeah,
place.
but what I'm saying, like, I have worried, I don't know whether you know this data, how many of basic scientists who actually been recognized for good discoveries who actually are patent trolls. Yes, there are patent trolls, but I think those are mostly basic scientists who are not supposed to be.
But then if we narrow the okay, so there are only very few basic scientists who are terrible, is that what you're meaning?
No, I'm not
Okay.
saying that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying like, if, for example, if I'm an NIH director, I'm gonna focus on what matters most. And to me, what matters most are that could kill people and cause a lot of waste of money are the proof of concept experiments that are being used, the preclinical experiments that are being used to do clinical trials.
Right.
Because
But the
that's really
preclinical
the problem.
experiments presumably are grounded on information that has been obtained in basic
But-
science.
That's not my point. That is not true because
So the preclinical experiments that just make things up?
no,
No, of course not.
No,
Yes.
my point is that a lot of this preclinical research are not as solid as someone who will do analysis of how microRNAs are destroying certain transcripts.
Right, so
Okay.
that
Maybe
they
that's
kind
your point, then.
so
That's your
the point is, no,
That's
the
your
point
opinion on the
is
field.
that,
No, the thing though is that, like, if when you read actually Nature Science, full science paper, they will tell you that what they observe is specific for their conditions. We're known for saying, under our conditions,
Yes, well, but
this
that's,
is what we observe.
yes, but that's the case again, you
And
know,
yes, the general
always for
relativity
anything.
thing.
Yes. So the issue is that indeed different areas or stages in scientific knowledge, you know, have different kinds of problems. But you know, at least all the evidence shows that nobody is, or no area of scientific process, you know, is exempt from these kinds of problems. But again, here you have, you know, for this group, in this case, you know, he's just defending the evidence-based medicine. But as I mentioned, you know, they have done work in all areas of research. And here is, you know, some of the arguments that he proposes, you know, conflicts of interest, financial or other. Actually, you know, they have some interesting work in other conflicts of interest that are just self-interest, that has nothing to do with financial conflicts. Just bring more money approaches to research. Questionable research practices, you know, as we saw. Give authorship, which is a problem. Salami slicing, spurious reward system, methodological illiteracy and innumeracy, basic science hype, and overall stark ethical poverty are becoming increasingly common. So again, the article is very interesting. The work that they do is very interesting, and you should look at it to see the many problems that our scientific system actually has today. So, and as I was mentioning, the issues of research, responsible conduct of research, look at different aspects of the research, you know, from data to authorship to animal research, and different aspects of the research context obviously call for different approaches to try to solve the problems. But, you know, data obviously is, you know, the basis for our inferences, for our conclusions, you know, and obviously what we publish. So concerns about how data is managed, how it's collected, you know, how do we select and analyze the data that we use, at what point do we share data, how much we share, you know, all of those kinds of questions, how we protect the data when we are using, particularly we're using human data, and who owns the data. All of these things actually can create important ethical conflicts, and, you know, can derail obviously the science that that we conduct. So this is the one that I was just mentioning, why most clinical research is not useful. This is a recent article, 2016. You know, overall, not only are most research findings false, again, that's the article that I was mentioning before from 2005, but furthermore, most of the true findings are not useful. Medical intervention should and can result in huge human benefit. It makes no sense to perform clinical research without ensuring clinical utility. So we are actually wasting our resources insofar as we are, you know, using money in ways, in medical research in this case, in ways that actually don't produce improvements in the population. This is one of the concerns about, you know, how we use data and how we analyze and share and all of those kinds of things related to data. This is about the lack of reproducibility in research, and you have in this case, you know, a bunch of studies, and you see us in that table, that have actually tried to evaluate reproducibility of science in different areas. You see the field, you know, in the one of the, you know, in the third of the second column, and then the different problems with reproducibility. So, I mean, we now talk about a crisis of reproducibility. So the NIH is trying to do something about this. Everybody is very concerned about reproducibility now because, you know, most of the things that we publish turn out that cannot be reproduced. There is no incentives to reproduce research. And there is, again, you know, one of the things that this does not mean that people are doing anything wrong, okay? It doesn't mean that in the cases of that irreproducible behavior research is research that has, where there is misconduct. there might be misconduct, but irreproducibility itself is not an indication of misconduct. What kinds of things can explain reproducibility problems that don't have to do with misconduct?
Population of ears in your study could be different.
Correct.
What is that?
Right.
If you have a very specific like population,
Yeah.
might not be.
What other things?
Well, actually, the same thing. Incomplete methodology.
Right. But incomplete methodology is a problem.
Correct.
It's a problem in the sense that why is the methodology incomplete?
Well, primarily, the ethical problem is a lot of science, a lot of PIs are trying to protect themselves
Correct.
Yeah.
from their
Correct.
competitors.
Correct.
So, and they will not provide everything.
All the data. Correct. Correct.
And I think that's a responsibility of the journals,
Correct.
right? But
Right.
the problem with many journals is they limit the number of pages, including the
Right. Although more and more they just had, the supplemental information. But this is the problem. So how do we know that the methods are incomplete?
which you can't repeat it.
Right. But if we don't try to repeat it, there is no way to know that the methods are incomplete. So even if journals have a policy of give us all the data, it's difficult for journals to know that some data is missing.
But do you think that that change should happen in higher learning institutions, which trains future
Correct,
scientists?
yes.
For example,
Yes.
I was trained that, for example, if Kyle gives me a protein, I will not be able to present this in my lab meeting until I demonstrate in my lab meeting that everything that Kyle told me that that protein will do
Actually happens.
happens.
Right.
And if I cannot do that, then,
You don't present it.
well, I could. I get
Right.
that.
Right.
I could. I mean,
Right.
I get like rims. and
Right,
get
right,
that
right, right, right,
thing.
right.
But that is a practice in my training.
Right.
So when I hear people getting a reagent or doing something without prior testing,
Right.
it doesn't compute in my head.
Well, yes.
So could it be that the way to address this is to change
The system.
the system?
Yes.
The higher learning
That's exactly the way. Right. Right. It goes to all areas of our research institutions, from education, whether we are providing the right type of training to our researchers, to how we fund research. All of those things actually are contributing to the present, context. So again, here are all of the cases of, different studies that I have done about reproducible research. And here is, the conclusions of this study, compelling evidence that the majority of these discoveries will not stand the test of time. So, they evaluated a bunch of research and they concluded that, they are unlikely to go anywhere. This reproducibility crisis is in basic and preclinical research, maybe as a result of a failure to adhere to good scientific practice and the desperation of, publish or perish. So part again of what we incentivize in research, is just the wrong thing. Now, another area that is also a serious concern is the issue of authorship. I'm sure that you all know what the criteria for authorships is, and you probably know also that those criteria nobody pays any attention to. Interestingly enough, which is, really is one of those things that you think, okay, what?
The journals are also changing. They're
They
not
are trying to change,
asking-
right?
Who's
Tell
going
us
to issue?
exactly what
Who
this
did what?
person-
I know.
Yeah.
But interestingly, although that is the case, I don't know whether I have the article that I that evaluates this problem, but actually that's not helping anyway. So but we'll see these. We'll see these.
Because people will lie or?
Yeah.
No, well, people lie. That's for sure. People lie. Yes. Amazingly enough, people lie. Yes. So, but these are the criteria. So these are the criteria for what constitutes an author. Okay. This is an and, not an or, which people apparently interpret as an or, though it is an and. So all of these are inclusive criteria. One needs to do all of those things to count as an author. So overwhelmingly, however, particularly in the biomedical science, again, I come from the humanities where most people, are only authors or maybe have a co-author. So of course, this just seems like the weirdest thing. Of course, this is what it means to be an author. Because we don't have the issues of, you have to get data from other people and statistics from other people. And so how do we account for all of those things that are necessary for an article to be published? And how do we recognize those people? So we don't have a system of recognition of all of those people who are necessary for science to be produced, because the only way we recognize merit is by authorship. And then there is a perverse incentive to just name anybody as an author in a paper, even when they have not, accomplished what they're supposed to be accomplished in, as an author. And this is a serious problem, obviously, for many reasons. Again, contributorship is obviously less restrictive and can be, you can indicate that. So, but why, this is an ethical issue, a serious ethical issue. Why?
Well,
People can progress if they accumulate a lot of authorship.
Correct.
They can, find new positions, progress in their careers.
Correct. So it's an issue of fairness, of justice. People deserve credit for what they deserve credit and not for things that they haven't done. So if you name people as authors, what are called voluntary authorships or, ghost authorships, all of these kinds of things that make people either appear as authors when they aren't, in the sense that they haven't contributed in the way that they have contributed, that they need to contribute, they are getting recognition and unfairly valued for things that they haven't done. That's just unjust. So it's a question of justice that we recognize who does what and under what conditions. But there is also another reason why authorship criterion and to fulfill authorship criterion is very important ethically. Also epistemically, but ethically. Not just an issue of just desert or, an issue of honesty and trustworthiness, obviously, but there is another reason. What is that it means to be an author?
Responsibility.
Responsibility.
And you're getting credit
Correct.
for your work.
Exactly. So when you are an author, what you are saying is, I am behind the results of this study or behind the claims of this study. Now, how many of you think that when there is a paper that has, 20 authors, all of them are committed to everything that is on the paper as the truth? Very few, very few. This is why, one of the, the famous case of the fraud with the stem cell, the Korean stem cell research that was, fraud. That it was fraud. But the author, one of the authors, whose name I don't remember now, but he was at Penn, very reputable scientist. Who was? I don't remember who. No, I don't think it was Rockefeller, no. I don't remember, but whomever, a reputable author, what was?
It was a ghostwriting.
No, he was, he was very famous, and so they asked him whether he wanted to participate. He said yes, and again, the article then, was shown to be false. He made up the whole study, but the co-author should have been responsible. He immediately said, actually, it didn't have anything to do with the study. But that's a problem, and there actually was not much more than that, well, you haven't behaved very nicely, and that was about it, which is a problem. So again, it's a question of responsibility. We are responsible for the kinds of claims that we make in our paper. So again, you have issues of honesty, trustworthiness, justice, and acceptance of responsibility. The same when we, issues about how to avoid some of these problems, which are not always avoidable, again, because of the perverse system that we have of incentivizing. But, one of the issues is particularly for graduate students who don't know what to do in a context where they need to be authors. Sometimes they think that they are authors when they shouldn't, and sometimes they are not authors when they should. And the order in which one is an author also matters. So all of these things, of course, should be discussed with time, but often people don't do those things. Why not?
They want to avoid conflict.
Yes, they want to avoid conflict, and then the conflict comes only at the end, yes. So trying to avoid conflict
It's not good.
is not,
It's
yeah.
never good.
So I heard that if your PI is supporting the study, they have the right to be an
That's
author.
false, that's false.
Okay, because I asked that at the
That's
RCR and they
false.
said that it's a requirement here. I was like, well,
That's false. That's false. Again,
That's-
these are the requirements of authorship, and they explicitly say actually in the guidelines. And it is true that they are trying now to reconsider these guidelines because in part, you have one of the issues is the international collaborations where hundreds of people, are participating, particularly in genetic studies or genomic studies. So who becomes an author? You sometimes have articles that have, many more authors than you can publish in a page, So, but they explicitly argue funding of a study, having the lab and being the PI in the lab, is not a criteria of authorship. Explicitly say that.
because I had a big argument with my PI. He said, if you're working on the time I pay you on any publication, then I should be in the publication.
Yeah,
I
that's
said,
false.
no, you don't know anything about
Right.
this stuff.
Yeah,
and I
that's
put him on
false.
a publication as second to the last.
Right,
No,
yeah.
just to avoid.
I know conflict,
which
but
is
that's
total
the
BS.
problem. Again, this is the difficulty because it is very difficult to fight against these practices.
Well,
The power dynamic too,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right,
Power
exactly.
you're with me in this lab.
Right, exactly. So that's why I'm saying it's very difficult to fight against these practices because of power imbalances between the PIs and the people who are working for the PIs.
Well, the problem that you have, and I always fight for people to be in and out, to be a part of an order. I always jump into that kind of fight. And the problem with that is your boss is wrong, that you are in his group. But one thing that he forgot to do is he's supposed to be training you. And he's supposed to be giving you how to conceive, design, acquire, analyze,
You can't conceive the projects if you're not an expert.
No, but they're not doing it. That is,
That's
Yes,
They're
so
not doing
that
it. They're
is
not-
his job to do
Right.
all of this. And if he did all of those with you as a postdoc, a trainee, then he becomes an author. An absentee PI does not deserve an author. But then it will reflect.
No,
that
and
they're not
a
being
PI who is training, so there are different,
I'm only talking about basic science.
right, there are different criteria. Okay, so do scientists supposed to mentor other scientists?
Yes.
Yes. Do we value mentorship?
yes.
In which ways?
In every way.
Really? Okay, in which way do we value mentorship? Do people get promoted because they mentor lots of people?
No.
No.
That's really unfair,
But-
yeah.
It is part of the criteria. It's not the criteria that would get
Yeah.
you promotion.
Yeah.
People say that's not quite true.
Well, they say that, indeed, they say that.
But
That's very different from whether it is the case.
Mentorship takes a lot of energy.
Correct,
But
correct.
the thing with it, this is interesting because people go to science, at least the people, I go to science because of the love for science.
Right,
That's why I'm willing to get paid $20,000.
Right.
I mean, yeah, like a postdoc is about $50K.
Right.
I'm willing to do that because of passion. I go there for passion.
yes, well, there
So
are
if you're passionate.
fewer and fewer people who
I
do
know,
that.
but in
Yes.
the arts, like painting and those
Right,
kind of things,
right.
that's what mentorship is about.
Yeah, no, you don't have to convince me, yeah. No, I'm all in.
How do we incentivize people to?
Well, we value, that's the thing, so this is the thing. What do we value the most? Publishing and grant getting
Money.
grants, right? So if those are the things that we value and those are the things that are going to count towards, promotion and, tenure, then people are going to be incentivized by those things, which calls for, I want to be an author in whatever paper, we are all, this is what is, groups do that. I put you in my paper, you put me in yours, even when we are really not authors for each of our papers, because we have an incentive to do that. That obviously, benefits particular kinds of groups because they are going to have more publications and they are going to get more grants, which affects, the people who are at institutions that are poorer or, have more difficulties getting funding. So the whole system, again, works in ways that really, in perverse ways, to incentivize, in very perverse ways. And authorship, again, is one of those things. Again, this is something that people should be talking rather than the same about the research and how we publish research. And I was mentioning, the different problems of publication. And this is, the issues of publication are not always ethical issues. They might be just questions about rules about publication, and sometimes it's difficult to separate that. For example, issues of duplicate publication might not necessarily be ethical issues. They are in our context. Why? Why is duplicate publication a problem in our context? But it need not be.
It's just like the value of each unit of publication.
Right.
So you're trying to get more value out of the data than it's actually worth. But if we retracted value from publications at units,
Correct.
instead of just value the science
Correct.
itself, it would be okay.
Correct. So it's not intrinsically an ethical problem. It's a problem in a context where we value simply the number of publications. So in that context, obviously, that creates a problem. This is, again, a recent study about the non-publication of large randomized clinical trials. And this is after the study actually evaluating both trials before and after the requirement to publish in the clinicaltrials.gov. And as you see, the results, we observed that non-publication is common in among large randomized clinical trials. This is again a study evaluating, because the idea was that once we had the obligation to publish the clinical trials in the clinicaltrials.gov, non-publication would go down. And this actually questions that. The lack of availability of results from these trials contributes to publication bias and also constitutes a failure to honor the ethical contract that is obviously the basis for exposing people to risks. And this is a study about industry sponsorship and research outcome. This is for the Cochrane meta-analysis. Where they find that there are many studies that have found this, but again, this is a meta-analysis. Sponsorship of drug and device studies actually are more favorably efficacy results and conclusions than sponsorship from other results. This doesn't mean necessarily that there is misconduct, but again, it's obviously a matter of concern. So, these are, as you can see, some of the many problems that we have today with our system of doing research, and the importance of obviously ensuring that we change the system, and we see that perhaps we get people to do ethical research, researching a more ethical way.
I have a question on clinical trial data. I know some of you are using them. So in the previous slide, they said that there's a lot of studies that are not published, which are negative discussed. This clinicaltrials.gov enforce that everyone who's in it have to publish their data? Then they should. They should, like at least on that clinicaltrials.gov. And actually, I was looking for a clinical trial that had been concluded based on the information, and thank you. And there was no date. you don't need to publish it, but
Yeah.
you put those out.
Right, but that's the thing, now you're required to to register the trial, but, you know, so far that's the requirement. Now, the hope is that because people are required to do that, that they will be able to, you know, get more data, but